On today's episode of Top Gear,
Top
floods
Gear.
and bombs and Iranian nuclear site.
Then at that point, it's going to become to like, is America policing everyone that has weapons?
There are terrorist cells in America right now. To be like, oh, anti-war, like no war. I'm like, that's not always possible.
If you, because I could Google how to make a nuclear warhead and have all the steps. I don't have the hardware to do it.
I love
Is
Jews.
this on
I am
record?
I am Jewish. So
Do you guys think there's a genocide in Gaza?
Joe, can a man have a uterus?
Without going into it, I think Israel's more likely to be the peaceful country.
If things keep panning out the way he's going, I think it could get a lot worse.
The U.S. Nimitz is supposed to be retired next year. It's our oldest carrier.
Oh yeah,
It's going to get blown up by a nuclear weapon, and that's going to be the justification for a war in Iran.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Bunker Boys 2. So I got a really fiery podcast for you. So I had all the boys, Joe, Scott, Shane. We talked about Iran and Israel. We talked about Palestine. We talked about America. And then once again, the military-industrial complex and everything that was happening over the last several weeks with, once again, the Iran-Israel conflict. So definitely a lot of hot-button topics, like pretty controversial takes in here, which I think you guys will find interesting, hopefully, and no one will be offended. But once again, we're not historians, we're not journalists, we're not experts, but this is something that's very important when it comes to America and foreign policy and whatnot. So have that at the front of your mind, that we're just kind of talking generally about these conflicts and how to even process them and how to even look at them the right way. So once again, these are just opinions. We're not trying to be offensive to one side or the other. And I think we have a lot of different ways that we go about some of these topics in relation to this, this escalating conflict that's been happening. So once again, you'll be seeing this on July 4th. So happy July 4th, everybody. And I hope you dig the episode. And I hope we have more of these in the future. So see ya. Peace. Hey guys, also really quickly, in addition, so I said in the beginning that we were going to get to the FBI, Kash Patel, DARPA, aliens. We didn't really get to that. We spent the whole 2 hours on Iran and Israel. So me and Scott, I will be having him back. This will probably be, he'll probably make 3 appearances in the next 15 podcasts or so. But I just wanted to pass that on. I'll get to all that stuff in another podcast because that's just so full of information as well. So thanks. What's up, guys? This is the Last House on the Left. This is where I chopped up with my friends, kill time, and speak what's on my mind. Before we get into everything today, which everything that we're getting into today is going to be quite crazy. We're going to talk about DARPA. We're going to talk about aliens and AI, which is where me and you were supposed to meet up of.
That's going to be carrying on a little bit from our last podcast episode.
Yeah.
Check it out.
The other reason why I wanted to do another Bunker Boys because we only had 3 of us here. We didn't have you / Thibodeau. Sometimes Thibodeau's in the Bunker Boys. We don't know. No, I'm just kidding. They catching strays.
I don't with Tibbs anymore.
Whoa, calling him out.
Hold on.
No, Tibbs is coming on with Ian Taylor in another
Tibbs,
week or two.
You're a good little man.
It's just we don't allow Catholics on the podcast. It's a little bit.
I know.
It's just unfortunate. New Pope, maybe they might change the rules, but just.
I don't know, Joe. I thought you were going to be.
No, dude.
Joe was a Catholic when he was in Atlanta.
This new Pope has
Jealous.
Nate hooked, bro. He's from.
I know. Well, Nate's the biggest White Sox
He's from
fan
Chicago, right?
He's from Chicago. Oh,
jeez.
We're gone.
Oh
for a
my
while.
gosh.
All right, that's
No, it's okay. It's all good. Fully uncensored. That's what we want.
I
So
get 5, so 3 more.
it's 5,000. You mean? Just kidding. So, like I said, we're going to talk about AI, aliens, Palantir. We're obviously going to talk about the Iran war. That's kind of the biggest thing that I wanted to talk about. That's kind of on like everybody's mind. I feel like the world is ending. I had a bad day at work today, which I'll tell you guys later. It was nuts. So, does anyone have any positive, good news before we get into this doomsday podcast?
Yes. Dan's pregnant, so.
Yes.
He's gonna get pregnant with all that Michelob Ultra. He's gonna be slamming.
I didn't know we were supposed to. That was supposed to be a secret. I didn't know we were talking about that.
I am drinking while pregnant.
I don't.
Just because I want him to come out with
well, men with you
higher tolerance.
So it's interesting with women. See, the alcohol gets collected into the liver,
juice
kidneys,
punch.
and ends up in the blood of the child. With men,
Hazy
when
pill.
men are pregnant, there's none of those issues. Men can drink beer all day long when they're pregnant, and they don't.
Yeah,
affect
right.
the
It
child.
goes right to the balls.
How does
Well, that's the extra filtration system. Yeah.
Joe, can a man have a uterus?
Are we being serious?
Yes.
No. I mean,
Are
they
you
could
sure?
Well, I could surgically put a uterus in a man. That doesn't necessarily mean
Does that count, though?
No, because it wouldn't work.
Wow.
Actually, I'm curious about that. How long before they can transplant a uterus that would work?
Jeez. I don't know.
They could do
I mean,
it.
didn't they transplant a head?
Oh, they could do it.
I don't think the guy lived.
Didn't
though.
the Nazis do that? Oh, we need to do a Nazi podcast, by the way.
You're gonna get demonetized now
Yeah,
because you said
well-
the N word and you're not allowed to say the.
Which one?
Well, that one, that most monetized systems.
Yeah, well,
Sorry to
Also-
our tens of viewers.
when we were
Yeah,
doing
we have to be careful.
Wait, so if you
about
don't
the
support
conflict
that,
in Iran.
yeah, if you
where
don't
people are
support
being
that, you're a
unalive.
Nazi. No,
Jeez, man.
that's
Oh
the
my
biggest
gosh.
thing.
Yeah.
You're an anti-Semite.
Yeah. Oh, trust me. We'll get into
I think we're
all
getting
of
ahead
that.
of ourselves there.
Yeah, we are, but I love it. So I think everyone knows who everyone is. Everyone here is an old guest. Joe is actually, this is the first episode, hopefully, that Joe's going to be on mic and not just the camera audio. So everybody cross your fingers.
Wait, so the
Make
episode,
sure.
so I've been on 2 and you lost one of them,
Yeah.
and then the other one you didn't have. Okay.
I lost
Joe, this
one
is
and
gonna
I
be a
deleted
banger.
the other
This is
one.
gonna be the best one.
Yeah.
So
Shane's jinxing it already. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, right now, for my audience,
He's
we're
gonna lose the audio for this.
We're just, dude, and once again,
Ben has his stuff down nowadays.
Yeah, I'm trying. Well, it's like when you have a podcast, like you have to be, not that like you have to be like informed because half of politics is just like what works for me or my side, and I'll just like make it work. Also, right before we get into it, I don't know. Should we talk about Iran first, or do we want to go into AI? I know I did say, I forget what I said earlier. Like I said, I don't have all the links, so let's just start with Iran, right? So, like I was just mentioning about having, like when if you're a podcaster or influencer or political commentator, is that what a pundit is, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, something
He's
like
put
that.
me on the spot for what
Yeah.
pundit means.
That's what I think it means, anyways. So, Charlie Kirk, everyone knows who he is, right? So he originally, like just a couple weeks ago on Twitter, was saying we don't want America to get into a war. Like America first. Like we need to be very much in our own, looking out for our own benefits. This is not our war. And then apparently Trump like got a hold of, or someone from Trump's what's the word, cabinet or
Administration.
his administration, thank you. And now Charlie Kirk is just like, yep, Trump has been here before. He knows what he wants to do. And so I'm just...
Yeah, Charlie Kirk, like he like sucks off Trump, and like sometimes it doesn't work to his benefit. So I really don't
agree.
understand it at times.
He just went to Cambridge and was like debating all... he was doing like the normal...
Well, that's like a good thing. Like he's bringing politics to this like TikTok and social media point of frame, and it's working. It's getting him viewers, but at the same time, like you'll see debates and he'll just like talk over people and like not have the best viewpoints. I don't really know how I feel about Charlie Kirk. I think he's on the right track in terms of his politics, but I don't know. What do you think of him specifically?
Do you know
'Cause
Charlie
he's,
Kirk?
I know who he is. I don't watch his show personally, so I don't know.
He's
he's
the guy...
kind of a neocon, not fully, but
Well, he's known for like, college is a scam. What's the abortion argument phrase that he uses?
he just thinks like what a lot of conservative like Christians think, like it's murder, and that's his main viewpoint on
Oh yeah,
that.
abortion is murder. Changed my mind. College is a scam. There's a couple other ones, but when it comes to Israel, man, whew.
Yeah.
So that's a super interesting thing. I've been actually looking at a couple documentaries. I just looked at this one. I really don't like Candace Owens. I feel like she always takes the controversial side of.
Nate won't like that. Keep
Oh,
going.
Nate knows. Nate knows. It's okay. I feel like personally, in my opinion, she'll take just like the random like opposite sides of the argument. Like one example I really always use is that when she is super like anti-porn, like OnlyFans, all that stuff. But then she'll go and support people like Tate and like Kanye West, Kanye West is pimping out his wife. You just want to talk about frickin' Nazis and whatever. That dude is trying to give the boys a comeback. So just so I don't get demonetized, I don't support Nazi Germany 1940s.
I would like to go on the record as well as saying that I
Everyone
do
just
not
go
support-
around.
Me too. Me too.
It's, yeah. Yes, me too.
I love
Is this
Jews.
on the
I am
record?
I am Jewish. So
That's new.
okay.
Yeah?
So
Well, financially,
I'm
you're
for-
definitely Jewish.
4% Jewish. 70% financially.
Scott's loving it. He's just like grinning ear to ear over here.
Well, this is Shane's favorite time of year. The sun doesn't go down until like 9:30, so he gets to drink until then. And, you know,
Are Jews against, or are like Messianic Jews against drinking, or is it Hasidic Jews?
Jews.
Not Messianic. Sorry, those are people
Yeah,
that believe in
I'm
the Messiah.
Yeah.
I meant Hasidic Jews, the people that are like actually. What is that noise?
Just continue.
Okay.
What's your heart rate up to?
I was just curious if Hasidic Jews. I assume they don't drink or smoke or whatever. Maybe a cigar, if anything. But anyway, so hey,
Mormons don't drink.
yeah, that is true.
What's that thing the Mormons do though? They soak.
They soak. Yes.
Yes.
Do you want me to explain that and get us demonetized?
Tell us about your experiences, Dan.
Oh my gosh.
Utah is a great place with all
Utah-
the Mormons. I'd love to go there.
Utah is a great place, but you cannot buy beer on Sunday, so just make sure you plan
No, but
out.
you can have
big
multiple wives. So
Yeah, I know,
It's
right?
a trade-off. It's a trade-off.
Can you?
yeah, you can.
Well, because polygamy is against state law. Is it Utah? Is it?
Imagine all the city governments that are
Yeah,
run
I
by
thought Mormons
Mormons.
didn't do that anymore. I thought that was like, I don't know how many.
That might be outdated, but
I don't
the hardcore old school people are doing it for sure.
Yeah.
You don't think, dude?
I
Like
wonder
the-
if there's Amish Mormons
there's got to be, yeah.
or like an equivalence to like traditional Mormons.
But
Like,
isn't it
you
crazy?
Regular Mormons is too radical.
Dude, they run the whole state, basically. Isn't that crazy? That part.
So we know where Shane's views are going.
BYU, that college.
do,
yeah.
Yeah, they run the whole state.
It's like
I mean,
That's
they're good,
crazy.
at, they're good at
religious
football,
enclave.
so who cares? Yeah, that's all I need.
Jeez.
Because I remember when I was in high school in Milford, there was a couple kids who are Mormons, and they're like, the only college I would go to is BYU. And I was like, is that really how it works?
I don't know, man. Well, if they're going there to soak, who knows? So that's crazy. So, anyways, the Iran war. So,
I hear Shane has an opinion on this that we have to hear.
yeah. So we all got opinions, right? So this is like we could, like I said, the most
I want to hear it.
the interesting thing here is that even though like most of us like basically had the very similar growing up, as we kind of mentioned in the first Bunker Boys, like me, Joe, and Shane are grew up conservative. I feel like even the more and more like I'll bleep their name out, but I was talking and are like so pro-war, and they think everything that's going on in like Israel and Palestine is like, oh, but Ben, there's all these Hamas terrorists. And before I really get into this, I'm going to say I'm not an expert, so this is just the boys talking. Nobody here is an expert. I've never been to Israel. My parents almost tried to go to Israel about a year ago, and then they heard like the rising tensions, but it was going to be like a whole trip that they planned out with like 20 people. So anyways, back to me trashing.
You get a lot of disclaimers on this. What people complain?
you got to.
You
No.
got complaints.
In fact, nobody comments or likes the video. They watch it, but I don't always get comments and likes. So like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching this, people. Thank you. I think everything that's happening in Israel and Palestine, which obviously we'll talk a little bit about that if people have thoughts and whatever, but the Israel-Palestine like conflict is kind of what's applicable to stuff going on with the Iran war.
Wearing sunglasses inside.
He always wears sunglasses inside. It's part of his...
Yeah, he looks like he's in the World Series of Poker
I
right
was
now.
gonna say, you should do a podcast like just a game of poker.
Yeah,
Oh, that would be
we should.
sick. Next
I don't know how
Bunker Boys.
popular it'd be, but that'd be interesting. You could like set up cameras behind us. We could show the
Yeah.
people
yeah.
play along.
That's true. It's true. Anyways, last thing. So basically, as I'm growing up, I'm noticing the more that I look at the media and not just like listening to what one side tells you, but like doing actual research and following several different journalists from different backgrounds, you start to like form your own opinions. And so if everyone wants to jump in now.
Let's just say this though, like this, for our generation, for us specifically, this is the first war that is highly publicized and on social media, and we're following. Right? We had
Yes.
Afghanistan, the Iraq War, but we were young during that. We couldn't, even if we did form our own opinions, it was more so like not all the facts were brought to us. I probably just went with what my parents were thinking.
I mean, I was 2 when 9/11
Yeah.
or 3. 9/11,
But this is the first
so.
time in our generation, our lifetime, where a war is possibly going to happen.
Yeah,
And you can either be for it now or be against it now, and you'll be wrong either way, because like that's how that works.
Right. And I
But-
feel like our childhoods were definitely like defined a lot by the war in Iraq,
Yeah.
the war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's our perspective on like, oh, we're going to go back into the Middle East again. They have nuclear weapons again. It just kind of feels like the same thing that was going on for our
Yeah.
entire childhoods growing up. And
Yeah.
that's why I think, like you're saying, your parents are maybe a little bit more pro-war, but
Yeah, I just never thought. So on a random note, this would be a good. I've never done this live on a podcast, so maybe, or I'll give it to all three of you. See how many you can get. So my parents think that honestly that George Bush was like a great president, and this happened like last night or 2 nights ago, and I was like kind of shocked. I was like, what? And like I said, we started talking about like, I mean, a year ago when I saw like free Palestine flags, whatever, I'm like, get out of here. Like that's kind of just whatever. That's like a very liberal leaning thing, but I didn't look at any of the stuff going on. And I think personally with the research that I've looked into it, and we've talked about this a little bit on the first Bunker Boys that we did, is that, dude, like over 2/3 of the casualties are like women and children. And I looked up the stat on CNN, I think it was about like 2 weeks ago, that like 94% of Gaza is like leveled completely.
Oh yeah.
But then also think about how much Israel is in like a predicament themselves, because like they're homogenous with like the people of Palestine. So it's not like people are wearing uniforms or whatever. It's just like the war, or similar in the war of like Iraq or Afghanistan, where it's like you don't like, it's almost like an unseen enemy, because they can just pop out of nowhere, and then they can just. I even remember, Shane, was it Fallujah when it was either Fallujah or Ramadi, where they could only shoot someone if they were, or they could only engage someone if someone was actually shot first or whatever. And think about like playing with rules like that. Obviously, this is not in regards to Iran right now. I'm just
That's
bringing up
rules
some
of
history.
engagement in any country that you go into. So that's but the difficulty with that is like, say you have a military target. Think of all the civilians that won't evacuate around that military target. So if you go in with the game plan and take it out, like there's a good chance you hit civilians too. And so the backlash of that, like there's really, with the Middle East, I feel like there's no way to conduct a war perfectly for anyone.
Absolutely.
right. And I mean, if you're in Palestine, it's not like there's really many places you can go, because the entire region is kind of
Unstable.
target.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And good luck crossing borders.
Yeah, I don't think anyone right now is allowed in or allowed to leave Israel right now. Did you have any thoughts on that, Joe, specifically, that line of thinking?
Which one? It's just the Gaza Palestine, because I think there's two different things. I think that discussion is a lot more nuanced than the Iranian one, just because
Absolutely,
they're I mean, Iran funds Hamas, but it's about
Right.
the only connection I can see between the two. I think it's with the war in Gaza. I think that's a lot more. And I don't know if I have a full opinion on that, just because.
Okay.
Because war is hell. Well, people say war is hell. I mean, it's just it's impossible to look at a war and find any good side of it. I think you can talk about, because the conversation is, when does it start, when does it end? Because this particular side of this war is started by Palestine invading Israel for a little bit, and then this is their response, and then they invade Lebanon as well. There's a lot of side stuff to that, but that over response can be traced back to, this isn't the first time that there's even been a war in Gaza. I mean, they signed over the Gaza Strip in pieces, but totally in 2003, 2007, I think, is when that, as it is now, became an entity, and that was after 40 years of war. And I mean, Israel fought 3 wars against the entire Middle East over the 20th century.
Yeah.
So, like, to talk about what's happening now, you'd have to talk about that in at least a little bit, or at least come to conclusions based on that. So it's hard to say. But then the Iran thing is kind of new.
Yeah.
Because you talk about nuclear weapons, and that's what's...
And we will get to that. The reason why I was bringing up Israel-Palestine specifically, because when I was speaking with someone else about a week ago, I was mentioning how, like my parents were mentioning how, hey, this is, Hamas is, they have, did you know that they have between 200 to 500 miles of tunnels throughout Gaza?
Well, you'd have to.
Yeah.
You're gonna...
Well, that was the thing. They were saying they have underground places where they're operating their military out of. That was the claim Israel made. And
yeah, but that's a general Middle East thing. Like, where did we find frickin' Hussein? He was in a hole, right?
Yeah, literally a hole, right?
Yeah, so that's
like a tiny hole.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I was thinking about this, and I going back to what I said earlier about presidents and whatever, about like Bush being a good president, because I was like, my first thing that I brought to my parents, because I'm just like starting to, really try to flesh out my political worldview and try to figure out like what's a good stance to have on for foreign policy. And so my parents go, well, he invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what you have to do when something terrible like 9/11 happens, right? And so as this was being like told to me, I immediately took it, and obviously it's the Palestine and Israel conflict is longer than that, and then even the Iran and Israel conflict goes way back to like I think the 50s, or at least whatever the timeline is there. But think about like October 7th was terrible. That was like, so I think almost 3,000 people died in 9/11, right? Yeah. And so 1,200 died in October 7th, or 1,300 civilians killed. All the hostages were taken and whatever. So it's like in one way, if you're like Netanyahu, right? It's like we have to respond like that. Like I watched a documentary last night or 2 nights ago from Frontline, which is like PBS, which is like a pretty bipartisan documentary that I saw, and they were blurring out all these images, and I was like, holy cow, like you want to talk about like just the ton of like assault, just like the worst things happening forever. And to a certain degree, it's like I'm sure the Palestinian people don't want like Hamas to like protect them, but then they're like, we know that the Israelites are a sworn enemy and whatnot. So that's how I was looking at it because my position would be like no wars at all, like almost like, I know it sounds dumb to be like anti-war, because that's a libertarian thing where you can be like, who's like a famous libertarian, like Rand Paul, right? He'd be considered.
So you're anti-imperialism, which like that's been a common belief for some people in our country for a while, but it's America foreign policy is weird because we've been involved in a lot of wars that didn't pan out, and they were disastrous. Some really shady wars. Like if you look into the Philippine-American War, they don't teach that in schools because of all the stuff that happened there.
Oh, yeah.
Like that was bad. We used the scorched earth tactic, basically wiped out entire population with famine in the Philippines, and this was directly after.
I'm not aware of this.
Yeah,
I'm gonna sound like an idiot.
So the Spanish-American War, when McKinley was in office, we fought to give Cuba their independence, which backfired, right? Because they became communists like 50 years later.
Yeah.
But
Cuba was one of the ones they let go. Like they didn't have to do that. There was reasons for that.
Right.
But,
yeah. So, but after the Spanish-American War, we got involved with the Philippine-American War because Spain gave us the Philippines for a lump sum of money or whatever, and the Philippines were like, no, we're not gonna be under your jurisdiction. We want our sovereignty. We want our independence. And so there was a brutal conflict for a little bit, and you're not gonna hear about that because of the bad things that happened and the pain it caused. But But there's also instances like we got Hawaii from that, so there's benefits too. So that's why America foreign policy is like, yeah, we're this superpower. We don't want to be involved in wars that like don't benefit us, but at the same time, sometimes it's necessary. And I know that's a very blanketed statement, but
absolutely. And like I said, the only reason why I brought up Israel-Palestine just like briefly once again, because obviously I know that's super. Once again, these are super high button topics, so no matter what you say, people are going to get mad and pissed at you. But the reason why I brought this up specifically is because the relation, as Joe mentioned earlier, to Iran. So this is just the AI overview, right? So key aspects of the relationship between Iran and Hamas, right? So financial support. Iran, as Joe said, they provide funding to Hamas and other Palestinian military groups, military aid and training, political support. Iran's been a consistent political backer of Hamas. This relationship has involved hosting Hamas leaders at conferences, expressing solidarity in the group's actions, fluctuating alignment. Like the relationship has not always been smooth, with a temporary strain during the Syrian war, So even Hezbollah has ties to Iran as well. So when bringing this all up, I'm trying to look at this first from like the other side, where it's like if you're Netanyahu, it's like, all right. So I think what's going on, once again, just to wrap up with Gaza, is terrible and whatever. But also, what do you like? As being a country's leader, when your own people get like openly slaughtered, it's like you want to react, you want to protect, and to a certain degree, this is what I was really trying to get back around of. What should have Bush done when 9/11 happened? Just like, all right, let's send like special forces over. Like that seems to be like, oh, anti-war, like no war. I'm like that's not always possible.
Yeah, I think the problem was really that it was a generalized war against terror. Like, we didn't know where Osama was. We were just kind of going in with a...
Well, their assumption was, and the intelligence... This is why it's so... Iraq's one thing. Afghanistan's another, because you had... Because there's a bunch of ways of looking at it, but the two ways that people look at it are the way they look at it now, where you have hindsight, and you don't want to...
Yeah, hindsight's 20/20, right?
The idea is that there might have been some information that is hindsight now that was also information then. Like, later on, did they know he was in Pakistan? But the idea was that...
Remember our argument? Oh, you took the sunglasses off.
Like, the idea that we thought they had weapons of mass destruction, that was a lie.
Right, because...
But that was Iraq. That's what... But, like, Afghanistan, the idea was that the Taliban were sheltering Osama bin Laden, and Osama bin Laden was responsible for 9/11. And so it was 2002. I forget exactly when the invasion started, because the invasion of Iraq was a few years later. But they, like, one of the interesting things is, like, they gave the Taliban a deadline. They're like, if you don't turn over Osama bin Laden by this deadline, then we're going to invade Afghanistan. Because, like, as it is now, Taliban are the quasi-government of Afghanistan, even though that doesn't even mean anything. And the U.S. didn't know that at the time, because Afghanistan's not really a country in the traditional sense. But anyways, they went in there thinking that Osama bin Laden was there, and supposedly he was, and then they cornered him over in the eastern corner of Afghanistan. He escaped to Pakistan, and he spent the rest of his time in Pakistan.
Yeah.
And then they used that pretext of he's still in Afghanistan to try to, regime change Afghanistan. But then Iraq was related more to his father and the Saddam Hussein, and justifications for regime change there go back more to, well, they should have, like, my opinion is that maybe if they were going to do it, they should have done it in the 90s after the first Gulf War. Listen, because you have clear provocation, you've defeated your enemy, like in 91 they didn't even go into the hell's the capital of Iraq? Baghdad. They didn't even go that far. Versus in the second Gulf War, they invaded and drove right into Baghdad and overthrew the government.
Yeah.
But they could have done that, or I think more realistically, if Bush wanted the plausible deniability, I don't want to open the can of worms. It is the Kurdish, but the Kurdish started a revolution after the 91 Gulf War, and Saddam crushed it. But part of the reasoning for that was because we let him, because after we had an armistice and said, well, this is a no-fly zone, so you can't fly fighter jets, but helicopters don't count.
Could I ask you a quick question too? Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no.
With with Saddam, so obviously there was no WMDs massive.
In the second one, I mean, yeah, as far as we know.
But he had chemical weapons still. But I heard that like the U.S. actually gave him some of the chemical weapons to fight.
Well, the Gulf War was the coalition against. So I like that aspect of it. A group of countries come together to stop a common enemy.
He invaded Kuwait,
right? And no one,
and
no one liked that.
That was against because that was under the UN,
right?
General Charter.
So I would argue that was a time where the UN came together.
And that was the big difference between that war and the second Iraq war, is because this was a big thing at the time that the NATO wasn't going to get involved because it was first that the U.S. tried to get the UN involved and they didn't form a coalition, and then with Iraq they tried to get NATO involved like they did in Kosovo and try to get a NATO alliance going, and they couldn't do that. I think France notably stayed. I don't know. Did the UK invaded Afghanistan? Did they invade Iraq with the U.S.? Because it was a big deal at the time that the U.S. was
Didn't
doing
the
this.
French too?
Yeah.
Even
No,
at
the French didn't, because that was the whole freedom fries thing. We were so pissed at the French they didn't help us that we're like, we're calling them freedom fries now.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Because even then, people were like, this is shaky justification for a war with an actual regime, versus that wasn't the case in Afghanistan. That they may have. That's why I don't know if the French sent troops, but they were more okay with the response to 9/11, that was Afghanistan, versus the war on terror that expanded that to Saddam.
Yeah.
Like, and there's plans back then of invading Iran and Syria and things like that. But Afghanistan proved to them that you can't just install democracies in places like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that'll probably be a recurring theme.
I mean, we left Afghanistan
continue,
2 years ago, and the Taliban
There's no
are
regime
back
change.
in charge. But Iraq,
Yeah, we'll get to regime change.
Iraq,
also as
it
well.
kind of
Remind me
worked
of
for a
that.
little bit, and then I actually don't really know where Iraq sits now.
I asked you that the other day.
Well, because the government that they set up worked while we were there for a few years, and then it collapsed into ISIS and all that.
Yeah,
Because that's
so
what's
are
going
you
to happen.
talking about the government that
Warlords.
overthrew Hussein?
Well, yeah, the one the U.S. installed. They installed democracy and had voting. But it's like you could, again, I'm not to get off track, but you look at China and Japan for half their history. It's mostly warlords. It's the same thing. It's just a bit more religiously lensed in the Middle East. But it's basically, we overthrew the current warlord in Iraq. That was Saddam. And then we installed our own government. It collapsed to ISIS, which was basically just a warlord tribe that took over the country because they killed the most people.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why you shouldn't get involved in wars in the Middle East. Like, what's
Exactly.
Right.
Why? What were some of the biggest things between Iran and Israel that's getting them like really at each other's throats? So this is I pulled this up. So this was I think his name is Khomeini's comments on erasing Israel. So he basically said wiped off the map. So sorry, maybe not. Khomeini. So Ahmadinejad was the subject of controversy in 2005 when one of his statements giving during the World Without Zionism conference in Tehran was translated by the Iranian state-controlled media as suggesting that Israel should be wiped off the map. So this is some of the beginning reasons why Israel is like, okay, we have to, why they're so like worked up against Iran and whatnot. So Israel considers Iran an existential threat. So basically like the whole, and one of the big, the whole, I would say, narrative for this whole thing is, does Iran have a nuclear weapon or not? So Iran's been chanting once again, death to Israel, death to America since like 1979. And I was curious if you guys knew this at all. Because in response to death to Israel, death to America, you hear the phrase for very pro-Israel people, Israel has a right to defend itself. So the question I wanted to throw to you guys, so have any other countries like chanted about like, death to Israel, death to, or not to, or just death to America?
Yeah.
Besides
well, the Ayatollah has been saying that. Do we believe what he's saying? Probably.
Could you explain to people what the Ayatollah is for those who don't know?
Yeah, so the Ayatollah is like the Muslim leader of Iran at this point. Yeah. So he's a super old guy. I think he's like 85. But he's been saying, death to America, death to Israel. So if you do believe him, which most people will, I bet he hates America 100%. Will he act on it?
That's the
That's the biggest question.
Mm-hmm.
So
Continue. Sorry.
What does a lifetime?
Yeah, what does it mean, Ben?
This is in the U.S. People are saying death to America.
Malcolm X said, and I quote, "We live in one of the rottenest countries that has ever existed on this earth. It's not genocide, Joe. Joe, that has to go. It's the entire system that has to go. Any system that would allow such atrocities and such devilry to happen and would support it, such a system does not deserve to exist on God's earth."
Yeah, I knew that Malcolm X was a Muslim, but
that happened.
Why would he bring that into?
Well,
his
he wasn't even a normal Muslim. He was Nation of Islam, which is like a weird. That's a complete non sequitur to think what Ben wants to talk about. But
isn't that crazy that that's happening? I didn't really want to get into the ICE protest, but isn't it crazy that people are I mean, it's understandable why they're doing this, but you can't be outspoken against the Ayatollah at all in Iran. I mean, even regardless, and I think something to be clear as well is that it's very much the Iranian regime and their government that's more of that Islamic State, which is more of the problem, because the actual people of Iran are like very peaceful. It's once again separating, I would say, as same with Israel, is separating the people from their government.
Right, and I don't know if Iran is how close they are to a nuclear weapon. I'm sure they're trying to develop something like that, just because
So they're at about
Israel's the only country in the region that has one. So why would you want to allow that kind of imbalance to exist?
So that goes in. So to come back to it, they're at about 60% enrichment, which is an interesting number, but we'll come back to that. The stuff like that he said, you just have to accept that as fact, because like you could debate the basis of everyone's opinions all day long, but then that's not going to help you dictate foreign policy.
Yeah,
the question is basically, like the first one is, do you want Iran to have nuclear weapons? That's the first question that anyone who's influencing this situation has to ask is, do you want nuclear weapons in the hands of the Iranian
should probably
government?
Like, I don't know.
But then
There's 10 countries with nuclear weapons. I don't think Iran is like the 11th best.
Right. But
candidate.
then at that point, it's going to become to like, is America policing everyone that has weapons of mass destruction or coming to
nuclear weapons? There's been, the breakdown to enforcement, but that is, I think, one of the more universal things that you could, because the real question is, in terms of U.S. foreign policy, is what you can do and what you can get away with. So, like, you know, in a world where everyone's a sadist, right, you could get away with just nuking Iran off the map as the U.S. and solve the problem right there. And you wouldn't have any public backlash. You wouldn't have any international backlash because everyone agrees that the best solution to this problem is to kill everyone. But you can't do that in this world because people...
You can't.
So the question is what you can get away with in terms of U.S. foreign policy. You know, what would other countries complain about? What would your own people complain about through voting and things like that? And so I think one of the more universal things is that nuclear weapons shouldn't be proliferated. And so you have you had a massive arms race in the 20th century between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Russia,
And even those two,
that's a podcast.
Before the Soviet Union dissolved, they realized, listen, this is kind of crazy. And they started disarming and things like that. So you go from a height of, I think it was like 18,000 warheads per country, basically. Now it's down to about 3,000-ish, 2,000 active warheads. There's more in reserve. But like that's a massive reduct from countries that have nuclear weapons and say, other countries can't have nuclear weapons. That's part of the idea that, like, in this global society, everyone's going to agree that no new country should get nuclear weapons. It's the same thing with North Korea, but they had less influence over the issue, which is really just that Israel has, you know. But the question is, like, do you want Iran to have? I don't think anyone agrees that Iran should have nuclear weapons.
This is where I'm going to sound crazy and everyone's going to laugh at me. Maybe it's because I've been listening to a couple of these certain political commentators, which are presenting a thought that even if Iran did have a nuclear weapon, that when it comes to them like harvesting it, because they had Joe, what were you saying about the 60%?
So
that's
enrichment,
uranium
yeah.
or-
So there's multiple uses for. I mean, uranium is what they're using. There's multiple types of way to make a bomb, but uranium's the easiest one. There's
Uranium,
enrichment
plutonium, right? Which
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
strontium or
uranium
whatever.
is what they're going to use. It's the easiest, the most readily available, and you can get. So
I'm just like-
enrichment. So when you're talking
Yeah.
about levels of enrichment, the process. I don't know how familiar you are, but basically, it's U-232. I could be wrong. I am no Neil deGrasse Tyson. There's
going.
one isotope. There's two isotopes or three isotopes of uranium. There's one that's the regular uranium. There's one that's like U-232-6 or whatever. And in order to get the one that's fissible, that is able to cause a nuclear reaction that causes an explosion, you have to, I don't know how you do it, but you basically refine the more abundant version of the isotope into the less abundant version, which takes time. And with any process, it's hard to do perfectly. If you could do it perfectly every time, you wouldn't have to reprocess it, I'm assuming. So say you have a nuclear power plant and you want to use uranium for that. You really only need a level of enrichment from 2 to 6%. You can go up to 20 if you want to use like experimental stuff, or you're trying to make like tiny reactors and things like that. But anything under 15 is usually used for nuclear reactors. And then there's some medical stuff that's up to 20-25%, different medications and cancer treatments and stuff like that. There's some research purposes stuff that you can do. I'm not quite familiar with them, but I just know from the numbers. That's up to 35-40% at most. And you can do some stuff up there. And then there's what you'd need for a bomb, I think, is 80 to 100% enrichment.
Yeah.
So there's no reason for them to be in this gray zone of enriching to 60% if they are what they claim they are, is using it for non-nuclear purposes. So if you're using it for fuel, you really only need up to 20%. If you're using it for research stuff, which I doubt Iran is actually using this, because this is high-end research, nuclear research. Like, you'd have to have massive hospitals or labs for this stuff that I don't think they would need the amount that they're producing for. And they're at 60%, which is 20% higher than what you'd need for that anyways. And the only thing you'd need more than that is for nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
And this has been going up since, because the counterpoint to that from the Islamic world's point of view is that Israel had the nukes first.
Isn't it kind of well known that Israel has a nuclear weapon, but is not?
Oh, they've denied it.
They've denied it.
It's not
because they probably got it from America.
Yeah, they're the only country.
No, they
with
didn't.
a nuke that still denies that they have one.
They
though
didn't.
Everyone knows.
One of the interesting side notes is that if Trump were to try to negotiate a settlement, one of the key things that he could ask for from the Israelis that would maybe placate the Iranians a little bit is that the IAEA would be let into Israel. So the international, I forget what it's called, may not be the IAEA.
Energy.
No, it's
right?
there's a nuclear proliferation treaty between all the countries of the world that basically everyone signed to except Israel.
But what was the thing about Trump backing out of the nuclear deal that Obama made in 2018? He said it was a bad deal.
I would assume so. I mean, at least from his point of view.
I thought it was just to spite Obama, honestly.
It could be, but it's also the idea that these deals aren't stopping them because it's you have nuclear inspect. So that's the idea. That's what I was saying. So even in Iran, through these deals, they allow some of these international inspectors to go in and look at it and say, listen, this is what they're enriching to. This is what they're using it for. You can hide from them, but I think it's espionage that's allowed us to see that it's 60%.
That's all.
But Israel doesn't even allow the inspectors to come in and make it look official because they have publicly denied that they have nuclear weapons, even though they really don't even deny it anymore. They just say that they don't.
Netanyahu has been claiming that Iran is close to a nuclear weapon since the 90s.
Stay on that, Dan. I have a link for that. So
yeah, which I don't think. That's not to say I don't think Iran is developing a weapon and that they might not be close.
Exactly. That's why.
Well, it's interesting because Iran has never been. I don't think Iran was ever involved in any of the wars in the 20th century.
Iran hasn't been in a war, I think, for 250 years.
That was Egypt and Lebanon and Syria.
I just mentioned just to catch up Shane real quick is that I just said this a second ago, but I was comparing, Shane, the fact of Iran possibly having a nuclear weapon to, there being weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And because just in the back of my mind, I know that's probably not true, but just from some of these other different leftists and liberal outlets, which are super outspoken against the war and whatever, to a certain degree, it was ringing true in my mind lately. So I was just hashing that out with Joe while you were while you were outside. So
Yeah.
cool. So to getting to the official timeline now for everything going on. So
Oh, you didn't want to? Well, because like, what do you think Iran would do with nuclear weapons if they got them?
Right, and the question.
well, they
is,
haven't attacked anyone.
Trump has
Israel.
said,
Yeah, well, last year, back in April, they launched a ton of, excuse my language, a ton of missiles at Israel, and that was without current
was-
provocation.
interesting to.
I thought you were
too,
talking about a
because
nuclear bomb.
No,
missiles
no,
got
last-
through the Iron Dome
last
'cause
year.
They fired their low payload missiles first, and the Iron Dome was taking them out, and then the high payload missiles came in.
Yeah.
That's the first time that, like, Israel's got to be feeling vulnerable.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's the thing where there's like hyper awareness, and once again, Israel has a right to defend itself. Similar rhetoric. It's like, dude, this is not to bring up the obvious, but they've been through frickin' living hell, so it makes sense why they're so frickin' paranoid. Plus, they're surrounded by Lebanon, Syria.
It's odd that
Jordan.
they invaded Lebanon, to be honest. Well, Jordan's not an issue for them.
Yeah, obviously. I was
It's-
just saying.
well, 'cause
I was thinking of the map. In
No,
my
no.
mind,
It's but
There's
the
a
same
lot of
thing with
people in
Iran.
countries
Like,
that hate
you'd have to
Israel.
go back and what was the last incursion? Because Israel strikes Iran's nuclear project every now and then, and that was the reason why they launched a bunch of missiles
I also-
into Israel.
Yeah. From what I was looking up to with this one Iranian journalist from I don't know if it was from the Wall Street Journal or whatever, but he was mentioning how one of the big reasons why Iran definitely thinks that a genocide is happening. So they're also like once again super.
But it's
critical
it's
of Israel.
a question
in
of
that
what
way.
the truth is.
Right.
And so the
Do you guys think there's a genocide in Gaza?
it's. I think the
And
term.
I promise we can move on. after.
Well, only because I think the term genocide is overused. Like, I don't think
that's absolutely.
I don't
correct,
think
yeah.
that Israel is. I don't think that they're necessarily purposefully being as belligerent as they are. I think it's just a combination of the tactics of their enemy and the fact that they don't.
Yeah, it's super messy.
That they
That's
don't.
one thing you have to
and that
admit.
they don't necessarily care. I think that they're a little bit.
Yeah, they're a little haphazard.
No, I
They
think
are.
that, I think
would say
I
they're
think
very
that
and I don't want to be
haphazard
offensive
because-
to anyone listening.
Yeah.
I
but
think that
that's-
it's just it's a
absolutely true.
it's a very. This is why I talk about you'd have to go through the whole history of it to be able to
Yeah,
talk about
okay.
it, because how they view Palestinians is a little bit different than how we may view Palestinians.
Right.
And whether that's warranted or right, I don't think it is. But why they do it is important to understand, like, what is happening now.
Right. And like you guys have said, it is a tricky kind of war to do just because, like you said, Hamas isn't wearing uniforms. They're mixed in
Yeah.
with civilians. So there is, the idea that there will be some civilian casualties, but the majority of people who have died in Palestine have been civilians. I think Israel has definitely waged the war in a way that is not exactly responsible or
Yeah.
careful towards the lives of the people, which maybe suggests they don't have a super high opinion.
Well, they're. I think on paper, not necessarily the emotional reasons, but the reason behind it is because they set a war goal to basically take over the Gaza Strip. That's what they're going to do. I don't know if they said that they're going to do that, but that's what they want to do. They could have set the war goal to be like, go into the Gaza, kill all the people we think are responsible, get all the hostages back, and leave. But instead, they want to just go in and kill everyone that they think is responsible for this and get all the hostages back, as many as they can,
Yeah.
and never allow this to happen again by taking over the Gaza Strip. And in order to do that, because Hamas isn't surrendering, this is what happens. And it kind of feeds into the other point that, like, the little exercise is interesting when you look at, like, comparing Israel to Iran in a vacuum, right? Like, which country would you want to side with on a moral ground without anything outside? It's not perfect, and it's not a way to explain the situation perfectly, but it is an interesting thing to look at. Like, what kind of regime is Israel and what kind of regime is Iran?
Right.
And if you were going to side with one or the other and saying that who's right, if they're both saying that they started it, who would be more likely to accept peace if the terms were acceptable? And I think that, without going into it, I think Israel's more likely to be the peaceful country, which is...
Interesting take. Okay.
Well,
That's good. So let's.
if they were
let's-
left alone, but the question
Yeah.
is, if would someone who's been wronged leave that person alone if they're justified in being wronged? But that's
Right.
a whole rabbit hole. I
And
don't want
that's
to go
the
down
whole
that.
last 60, 70 years. It's
But when you talk about nuclear warheads, right? Like this is the question that's really, Israel has had nuclear warheads for this entire time, and they haven't used them. Versus, would Iran use a nuclear weapon to attack Israel? Which, first of all, is a much smaller country. You could probably flatten Israel with
Yeah,
20 nukes.
there's like 9 million people in Israel, and there's or 8 or 9. It's single digits, and there's
Right,
92.
They mostly all live in the capital.
But
I'm not like Ted Cruz. I know how many people live in Iran. Okay, so moving on. So we're gonna go now to the actual what we know, like what's happening right now. So this is so for the current rising tensions in the Middle East. So America and Iran had planned to meet for peace talks for the 6th time. This was Sunday, June 15th. So right before this, Trump evacuates U.S. personnel from Bahrain, Baghdad, and Kuwait on Wednesday, June 11th. So Friday, June 13th, Israel attacks Tehran. So this is what they call Operation Rising Lion. So I guess I'll throw this to Shane, and then we can go clockwise. So basically, we have these. We're planning to meet with Iran for the last time. I think Trump gave him 60 days. I think was the timeline, and then Trump's Twitter these days is like, it's not gonna lie, it's scary to watch. Like regardless of where you fall with Trump, it's like it's kind of nuts at least in my opinion. So who do we think? Do we think Israel went and did this attack with the confirmation from Trump, or do you think they did it on their own right beforehand?
I think Netanyahu, the way he's acting now, is he's like, I have America in my back pocket. If things go to hell, I have America in my back pocket. And beyond that, I have America's allies as extension in my back pocket if things got even worse.
Right.
So I absolutely believe he's like, he thinks we're totally siding with them. Anything they do, any attack they make, any defense they make. Some people say Netanyahu is like a Bush version for Israel's government, like he's a warmonger. I don't have enough research to back that, but I could see that based on what's going on. So I think if things keep panning out the way he's going, I think it could get a lot worse. A lot worse.
Do you think he's like worse than like Trump?
The thing about
Trump is weird and interesting because he's like, he does these things and you're like, is he thinking about the long term?
Right, exactly. Or is he just?
Well, I think it might have been in the episode we lost that I was talking about Trump. I have a lot of problems with him. One thing I did like about his first term was that he was the first president in a long time to not start any new wars. So
right.
I don't know. The question is, he's given his 14-day notice. Within 14 days, we're going to tell everyone what we're going to do in Iran. And the question, like Shane said, I agree with him. What could Israel do that would lose the support of the American government? Because right now, Israel has the support of the American government way more than any other country in the Middle East. Definitely way more than Iran.
Yeah. I mean, even you look at that Congressman Lindsey Graham, right? He's like, let's go boots on the ground and
right.
Like, boots on the ground.
Well,
Ted Cruz was saying he wanted to be the number one advocate for Israel in the American government.
So this is Dave Smith. So he's like a libertarian guy. Like he's a stand-up comedian and kind of part of the Rogan sphere. So he's always been super pro-Trump, but he's very America first. And this is him talking about kind of rescinding his vote on Trump.
Yeah, well, it's just you're allowed to throw as many lies at the wall as you want to when you're selling a war. So there's a lot there to kind of unpack. Number one, I would just say, first off, the accusation that Iran was trying to assassinate Donald Trump just doesn't meet the most basic of
I'll get to that in a sec.
I mean, so you're telling me that the Iranian regime essentially declared war on the United States of America already. And the neocons and Benjamin Netanyahu himself, you can read in his writing in the 90s when he was telling us that Iran was a few years away from a nuclear weapon all the way back then. But he was also saying that they want...
Oh, come on, Dave.
Ooh. I love talking head shows. They're always so self-important.
All right.
Saddam Hussein for other reasons, for their clean break strategy.
I actually really like breaking points. This is good stuff.
In the clean break memo written by Richard Pearl and
All
David
right.
Wormser, they talked about this over and...
Okay, what's this? Breaking: U.S. launches attack against Iran 1 hour ago.
Oh.
literally while we were recording this.
Could be interesting. So the thing I wanted to answer your question is, I think yes.
We got
Hold on one
news,
second.
live breaking news on the thing we're talking
And Ben
about.
skipped to the end.
Okay.
All right, hold on. Let me.
This is a Fox News alert. News from the President of the United States that there has been an attack inside Iran. Just moments ago, President Donald Trump putting out on Truth Social, we have completed our very successful attack on three nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz, and
Three nuclear sites.
All planes are now outside of Iran airspace. Again, this from President Donald Trump. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site of Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for...
I mean, to be fair...
Yeah, Joe, remember me and you were talking about this, though?
To be fair, Iran has no air defense capability.
Air defense. So did you see that thing I sent you, Joe?
No, but this issue, the only issue. Well, okay, we have to unpack this. Keep playing it. Let me see what.
No, Joe.
Yeah, that's just seconds ago from President Donald Trump on Truth Social, suggesting that those B-2 bombers that perhaps
those lucky
were
bastards.
on the way,
They
may
actually
have
got to
been
do
behind
something.
This. We'll get more details on the...
One really interesting thing, really
B-2s
quick, on those
up to it.
B-2 bombers. Apparently,
That's crazy.
Israel only has their planes specifically can only, I think, carry 2,000 to 5,000 pounds. We have two 15-pound bombs. So what it does is that they drop it because it's like the nuclear bunkers are way underground. So one bomb drops and breaks up the soil just to get down there, and then the second one comes in.
Oh yeah, we have the best air program easily in the entire world.
So the B-2 bomber, which is still, I would say, unequivocally the most advanced aircraft in the world, was developed in 1970s.
DARPA.
I love to see what we have now. We unveiled the new bomber that they're building a few years.
Joe,
it was a couple
what
years
were
ago.
they using during World War II? What was the B-what? 52?
I mean, the B-52 was probably the most.
Yeah.
No, not B-52. I'm sorry, the B-29 was probably the most advanced bomber of the Second World
show
War.
On that on Apple TV.
But the B-52 is funny because it's 70 years old. We introduced it in the 50s, and it's still our main strategic bomber.
So,
well, because I mean,
that's that stat I was showing you. Iran has 200.
Oh well,
aircraft.
well, yeah. It's actually kind of funny because there's a meme going around about because Iran was one of the last operators of the F-14 because back before the regime change, we sold them a bunch of F-14s, and they all got no. But the F-14 because that's the plane from Top Gun. So
Top Gear.
So
on today's episode of Top Gear,
Top Gear
and bombs and Iranian nuclear site.
So yeah, they all got bombed by Israel. I'm surprised if that's really true. I'm surprised they went through with it. But that goes back to my point that to answer your question, I think the U.S. knew about it because there was a report on Wednesday, Thursday. I can't remember when it was. So the Israel had a plan to assassinate Khomeini and kill the Ayatollah of Iran, and Trump told them no. Whether that plan was well thought out, I don't know, but that obviously means that they've been communicating with intelligence, and the fact that he just launched this strike proves that they've been cooperating on this. Big picture, that goes back to the idea that I think the entire world doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, and so the United States is okay with using their.
You don't think China and Russia does?
But go back to intelligence, because intelligence has been telling us there was 2 attempts on Trump's life.
Yeah, so I have a link for that.
I don't know the validity of that.
Really quickly too, I know we kind of already mentioned this, but while they were doing this strike for the Operation Rising Lion, I don't know if I mentioned this, so that's why I'm bringing it up. So Israel specifically were targeting nuclear strikes, Air Force bases, and missile launch pads. They weren't just firing blatantly, which it seems like.
Well, no, that would never be the way that they would conduct surgical
and I have
strikes.
videos for this, so I'm trying to pull this up too. Where so when Iran responded and fired back at Tel Aviv, they were just sending it literally into the middle of the city. So I'm trying to pull.
Well, that goes back to the question of what regime would you pick? One of the comparisons is so these countries have been at odds and launching crap at each other for 30, 40 years, right? Iran's response to that is to build up their missile program, create deadlier weapons, and create more of them. Israel's response was that, but also to create the Iron Dome system, which is to in a regime where you don't at least hold the facade of caring about your people, you don't build a missile defense system. Iran doesn't have a missile defense system to protect their citizens.
That's why, why
attacks.
does America need to get involved then if they don't even have an
because
that's
because
also
the question
Mossad,
of
you talk about intelligence. They went and they took out 20 of their several scientists, and then a ton of
that's what they've
chief
been
of staff.
The turnover rate on the head of the
military.
nuclear program in Iran is like one every 2 years. Pretty funny how many times they've been killed by the West. Well, to answer your question about that, though,
this is some. I'll pull up some footage while Joe is talking about the attacks.
What was your? Repeat your point real quick. I don't want to.
Oh no! I was just the last thing I was saying, just wrapping up.
Why the U.S. has to get involved? Well, so the reason why they got this airstrike done, and
I don't think they should get involved.
Before this happened, this was going to be one of my criticisms of Israel is that because you can let it buffer if you want. Let me save the time.
You're good. Keep going.
Because the reason why the United States needed to get involved with these strikes is because supposedly Israel was like, listen, we hit all these. If they were cooperating, this is what they would have said. We hit all these sites that you wanted us to hit or that we wanted to hit and you let us hit. And there's 5 more that we can't hit. There's some underground and there's some that's far away.
Israel doesn't have.
They don't have bunker bust. They don't have the
they
bombs
don't have
required to destroy these targets.
Right.
My criticism was going to be that Israel knew this when they got into this war, and they were like, "Listen, the United States will do it if we ask them."
That's the back
and they
pocket
got
thing
into
I was
this,
talking about.
knowing that they would have to. They would use the U.S.'s influence. But the question is whether they should have, because again, the idea that if the U.S. also doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, this is a really good way to solve that problem. Let Israel do all the problem solving. And we'll
come in on the back.
We
end.
shouldn't have had to
we
do
were
that.
Talking about this though. Remember?
I know, but it's
no boots on the ground. America.
No.
Well,
if you think about it, if they're just flying, there's really no boots on the ground.
Yeah, but they risked American lives to do that.
They did.
Whether or not the risk
but they're
was
also.
great.
But everyone, they sent 3 carriers over there.
Guys, listen.
3 days ago.
Well, that's just posturing. Because listen,
like a show of force.
If you didn't, Israel would. Iran. There'd be more likelihood that they
go ahead,
something
Shane.
hostile.
Can I pose a question? So, what not the Israeli retaliation? What's the American retaliation by Iran? What is?
Oh,
that?
I don't know. That's the question.
Okay, let's predict now because this happened in real time on the podcast.
Ted Cruz said something about Iran trying to bomb LA, but I don't think their missiles can go that far.
No, it would be some. It would be.
He literally said
it
that.
would be a terrorist.
Not on the
it would
Tucker
be a
interview,
terrorist attack.
They did say something about watch out. There may be a potential Iranian cyber attack on.
Dude, I
America,
think
which is the modern.
So there are terrorists. There are terrorist cells in America right now.
There are U.S. military bases all over the Middle East that they could strike if they wanted to, and none of them would have the defenses to stop an actual barrage of missiles. Okay, so to take my regular hat off and put a tinfoil hat on, a conspiracy theory that I don't necessarily subscribe to, I don't, but it is intriguing nonetheless. Like if you believe 9/11 was an inside job, this would make perfect sense.
It wasn't. I'm spoiling my 9/11.
That stay tuned. That
guys.
The United States would stage or allow to happen a false flag attack to justify a war in Iran. This would be the perfect time for it.
Are you talking about something like Vietnam?
No, because it would have to be worse than 9/11. Okay. In order to get the United States populace, because they're not on the side of actual invasion, it'd have to be something stupid.
Hold your horses for a second.
So the craziest one I've heard.
What's worse than 9/11?
This is just for the entertainment value. The craziest one I've heard, and the odds are really long, and just being an odds guy, I want to put money on this. Not that I believe it's going to happen. Not that I think that it's realistic.
I'm tracking with you.
Iran already developed a nuclear weapon, or the United States is going to say they already have. This is the whole reason I brought this up, is that people are joking that because the U.S. Nimitz is supposed to be retired next year, it's our oldest carrier.
Oh yeah,
it's going to get blown up by a nuclear weapon, and that's going to be the justification for a war in Iran.
Oh man,
the logistics of it could be in numerous different ways. We could do it ourselves, or the Iranians could actually do it.
I remember.
I'd like to point that out. Say it's a 1 in a million. I want my $1 million when I put my dollar down.
Fair enough.
If
you
Iran
heard it here, folks.
Could develop weapons, what would be? I don't know if you would know this, Joe. What would be the form? It would probably be. They wouldn't be able to get ICBMs, would they?
So their missile program is rather advanced. Actually, before all this started,
Iran?
Yeah, they were selling drones to Russia. Russia buys a lot of drones from Iran because
Someone broke the seal.
Iran's mission. I know. Iran's missile program is actually rather impressive. I mean, because remember back in the Gulf War, the Scud missiles were all the rage. They're fighting a protracted war of attrition, basically, and they're going to lose every time. So they need to make their weapons cheap and abundant. It would probably be a bomb, but they don't have an air force. So what they would probably do is they'd form some way of putting it on a Scud missile, launch all their missiles. Say they, because they launched 220 that one barrage last year against Israel. Say they have this planned, right? That they know that they're going to be able to put a nuclear warhead on a Scud. They launch 700 Scuds. There's no way you could shoot them all down.
Yeah.
One of them is a nuclear warhead.
Well, even that's what the first,
and it's it's a small one. It's not because they don't have they don't have plutonium. They don't have a way to make.
You don't need a huge one.
They don't have a
well, even when
hydrogen bombs or anything like that.
Iran's first response to once Israel's attacked on the 15th or the 13th, they sent 370 over, and the Iron Dome caught 91%, something like that.
Yeah,
but think about.
But if you were,
the ones that make it through, dude, and so right now, from what I looked up 2 days ago, there are 220 dead Iranians and dozens of Israelis dead, but there are hundreds of Israelis injured, hundreds.
Well, that would be the way I would see it. If the U.S. was really kicked on getting into a war, or if it really did happen that they nuked a U.S. carrier in response to this, you'd probably have a war in Iran for regime change. Yeah. Would it be? Well, the only thing I could say
that's
is
what I think might be really about, though, is regime change and not nuclear weapons. When does regime change ever go well?
If they, I don't know. They probably would.
I don't know. I'm speaking. What do I know? I didn't go to college.
The claim is that if they could get Iraq done a lot quicker than they did, they would have gone over.
They said Iraq was going to be 3 months or something. Wasn't that the original?
That was the idea. That was because in the first Gulf War, that's what it was.
Tell that to Lindsey Graham.
But because when you go to regime change, you run into insurgencies. And you're not going to be able to affect regime change. Yeah. But you could bomb the regime into a hole.
I'm just saying,
and that worked for the first boy. That would be, if it really gets escalated, that I think would be an acceptable outcome to this, is that either Israel starts a war with Iran and they, you level everything you can with airstrikes.
I just don't think we should be going to war, and that's what I don't.
No, I don't want to. I don't think anyone agrees.
But I was trying to pull up with. I
don't
think
Trump wants to do that either. I don't think Trump wants a ground war.
I don't know.
But I think Trump sees the effect because it's just an airstrike. Well, I want to see the response. But I want to see the response.
Yeah, I'm just being honest with you. For me personally,
they have a lot of oil. They could fuck up the world economy pretty easily.
Yeah, just the last two weeks, to be honest. Especially Dan, you probably feel similarly. Where I'm like this is I almost want to rescind my vote because what happened to being and this is the whole argument, right? What happened to being America first?
Right. And I mean, I don't know. We're probably Joe is leaving right as I'm gonna talk about tariffs.
This is when it's gonna get good.
But the two things that most people I talk to who are Trump supporters, their two main issues they were voting on were war. They didn't want another war, and the economy, which is a whole other issue that we're not going to be able to get into depth with. But I mean, Trump's really been fucking with that. So what purpose?
Let's speak freely, me and you, right? I regret voting for Trump, man. My number one reason was the border. The second one was when he sits down with Putin, when he sits down with Xi or Netanyahu, or these other world leaders. I don't think Biden was very respected. I don't think if Kamala would have won, I don't how would Kamala be able to handle something like that? No, I know it's I know it's a typical thing. How would this person be? But when it comes to, that's where I am honestly. Hot button topic. I know Joe and maybe others would disagree with me, but I am a little, to a certain degree, I'm kind of dude, you said this wasn't going to happen. And I'm worried, and I think a lot of America is worried who isn't MAGA. But also, I think MAGA is also quite divided right now too, because MAGA didn't want more as well. But
right, that's why it was crazy to see that Ted Cruz Tucker Carlson interview.
You watched the whole thing?
I didn't watch the whole thing. I just watched clips, but I want to watch the whole thing.
It's worth it. It's very good.
That whole argument was in bad faith.
You think so?
They both can't say what they're really thinking.
I think Tucker did. Could you say that on the mic again?
I don't think they. I mean,
in regards to
Ted
Tucker,
Cruz couldn't say what he was actually thinking.
Well, listen. It's pretty known that Ted Cruz is funded by AIPAC, that organization.
Well, he said it himself.
Could someone
and also
could someone mention AIPAC for someone?
And also, hold on. And also, Tucker Carlson supported the Iraq War way back when, and
he's been his clips of him being against Iran and having nuclear weapons.
He changed
too.
his views, which that's my main point. Is people should be able to see foreign conflicts, give their opinion, and then if it doesn't go the way it goes, politicians be like, they should give an apology, or they should say like, oh, that didn't go the way it was supposed to. My bad. Like, I won't support them going forward. They don't.
Yeah, but
politicians don't do that. But they keep the funding they're getting, and they keep supporting unnecessary wars, and like, it's an unending string, and that's what Tucker Carlson said at one point, and I agree with that.
Well, that is the thing with Iran. So, do you regret voting for Trump?
I don't, just because I think the Democrats would figure a way out to do this worse.
Well, that's why I'm really curious.
I love the honesty.
I wasn't going to be surprised if this had happened, but I would have been.
I got to finish this ale.
Because again, it goes back to that question of what do you do if you don't do anything? What happens if Iran gets nuclear weapons?
Because you look weak. Biden looked weak during his
Iran gets nuclear weapons, and the worst case scenario of that is
wasn't
they use
Biden
them.
like a big BB fan? Like he's like hugging him and like basically crying with Netanyahu on October 7th.
It's all politics.
Yeah,
it doesn't. But like, what would be the worst case scenario if that happens? They say they drop a bunch of nukes on Israel. Then what are people going to say? How come Trump didn't do anything?
Well, Pakistan
to stop
just
Israel?
came out two days ago and said if Israel sends another attack upon Iran, they will use a nuke. Do you want me to? I have the link here. If you want me to pull that up. I don't know, but is that legit though? Is that just?
But that's a whole nother concern. Like that's a question that people say now is what the U.S. could have stopped Pakistan.
How does Pakistan get a nuke on a question?
I wanted to ask.
That's a whole other story. India and Pakistan are both nuclear powers. That's the more likely place to come with a nuclear war. Is they would have an exchange between the two of them. That and China would be involved. Probably.
But Joe, I wanted to ask you the generic question: how do you feel about foreign governments lobbying in other governments, which is what AIPAC's doing?
Oh, it should be. Well, foreign governments, yeah, but AIPAC isn't.
It's not registered, but
that's the problem that you have with legislation is that you'd have to. I don't know how you'd legislate it because they're not they're an American organization built of American citizens that happen to have influences that support a foreign government. So it's like, well, how do you? You'd have to prove that, which is easy to prove, but then how do you legislate saying that that's illegal? Because these people are U.S. citizens.
Register? So I thought you had to register under some.
That's what I thought.
Well, it depends on what you're donating to. Like they donate to PACs, and so it's. But they're a lobbying group. It's the question of lobbying. I think in general, lobbying should be.
Really quickly, can I say one?
I don't know how you'd ban lobbying without a million other problems springing up.
Not to backtrack, I just want to throw this stat out there. Even for everyone in America, so 79% of Democrats and 83% of Republicans do not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, just it's a pretty universal statement. I think internationally, except you asked about China and Russia, but then the question, like people talk about, is World War III. They're not going to get involved. If the United States really did go to war with Iran, which I don't think is going to happen, I think Israel might go to war with Iran if they were probably going to do anything.
So what does Trump want to get out of this once
he wants to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon?
Doesn't he? Yeah,
and wants to force them to a table for another agreement that he feels like could be better used to enforce the agreement that they don't get nuclear weapons.
The agreement with Putin did not go well.
but see, those are two different governments. When you're talking about Iran, like
it's true, it's a much smaller country, and so but the capability for danger.
Yeah, but the question is, if you were trying to stop Putin from getting nuclear weapons, like if we live in a world where Russia didn't have, like the idea is that you can't with Russia in the way that you can with Iran because they have nuclear weapons.
Right.
You can't launch airstrikes in Russia to stop them from doing things you don't want to. But you can with Iran, so that changes the dynamics of the international agreement. So if you make an agreement with Iran that you feel like if they held to their side of the agreement would prevent them from getting nuclear weapons, you would sign that because then you would say if they break the agreement, then we're just going to go back to bombing you until you agree to not do it. And I feel like from their point of view, that's what's the more probable thing that they can force to the table is to just keep them in the cycle of
But my one qualm, or
otherwise
multiple qualms with Trump is like he uses his ego to say, "I'm going to appease everyone, end all the wars." That's unrealistic.
Shane, you're absolutely right.
But at the same time, this isn't a war.
It's a potential war, and it's a potential big one.
What would I don't know.
So this is a quick little thing on Trump says he decides what America first means. This is the Atlantic.
This is such a stupid debate. Also, I hate the
Because
Atlantic.
this is breaking up not even just Democrats, Republicans. This is breaking up Republicans.
That's what I'm saying. It's breaking up MAGA. MAGA's splitting.
But it's just
So-
it's nonsense. Who cares? Who
Who cares about America first?
This is
I
the debate
care.
about semantics. This is what this
I
breaks
just
down
don't.
to.
I don't. I
They're
really don't
arguing
like his
about
language.
a term that one of them should have copyrighted.
Well, considering
And
I'm
then
the one
no
who
one else
developed
could have used it.
America first, and considering that term wasn't even used till I came along, I think I'm the one that decides that.
yeah, it's
So-
a response to a
but
criticism
then
about
he's-
his policies.
are
that's
you
saying
aware-
that his
yeah.
policies aren't American first, but that's not an actual criticism.
But then he's doing
Talk
crazy.
about the policies instead of the debate about what means America first.
Yeah.
It's stupid.
But I think. But then he. What about the whole Tulsi Gabbard thing, though? She is the director of national intelligence.
Yeah.
And she says, comes out in March and says, we have intel that says Iran does not have a nuclear weapon.
They
And
don't.
then they go and ask Trump, and they said, no, she's not correct. Like, she's wrong. Like, you just say that and you flippantly so right before they just had a meeting.
What was the context?
They
for
had
that,
a.
though? I'm not trying to defend him. I'm curious what the question they asked him was and what the because
because
you could frame that
he
question
says
in a way that
Iran
makes
has
her
a nuclear
wrong.
weapon. We need to go bomb them, whatever. Tulsi Gabbard says we don't have one.
But I don't think Trump actually thinks that Iran has a nuclear weapon now. They would be acting different if they did.
Then people on the left would be like, then he's a warmonger.
But what's the question? What did they ask? That's all I'm saying is his response was that they do, because I don't think he thinks that they have a nuclear weapon. Not yet. But I think they're capable of it. But they haven't developed it yet. That's why they're bombing these facilities to keep them from... Because it's still a complicated process. You can't just whip it together in a weekend.
That is not to be overshadowed.
But they're
Super
at the
complicated,
but they're at the threshold of having the capability of whipping it together.
I don't know. What do you think?
Months.
I just think he's super reckless and why is our I still don't know why our president is on f***ing Twitter of all.
Well, that's just his
he's not.
personality.
He's
but
on his own
compared,
social media
yeah, but
website
compared
now.
to
This is
Truth
coming
Social.
out.
Elon
He
kicked
said he
him
would
off,
build a
right?
Trump hotel in
Yeah.
Gaza. Like, do you remember that? That was
No, he still has
Trump
that
and that's hyperbole.
apprentice
Yeah.
TV show ego.
He just
he's
says
always
stuff. He
Yeah,
literally
but
just
that-
says stuff. And it doesn't even
But it's
I don't even
fascinating,
know if
like
it's
that-
a plan. It's
like
just
that-
like
well, yeah, but that-
whatever
that-
he wants to say. at
that
moment.
Gaza comment about the strip is basically America washing his hands of the problem, because he's like, listen, you want to both of you have this problem with Gaza, right? Both of you don't want the other one to have it. Give it to me,
You can have one.
and both of you will be happy. Neither of you will own it. We'll develop it into this perfect place.
But that's America coming saying
But
we're going to fix everything.
But he knows that they're going to say no.
still gotta get to the FBI, by
The
the
offer
way.
is there to say, listen, this is a solution that I suggested. You'd rather have a war instead of a solution that both of you would be okay with, which they wouldn't. But the idea is that this is a solution. Go ahead, kill each other. I'm not. You idiot.
We're good.
That's
We're
like into your keys. Oh. But I
I'm
think that
definitely editing that out.
he's still a narcissist. But I think that this is the same idea. These
yeah, and I'm
you
fat.
have to
doesn't change
posture.
the issue.
You have to posture, and if you don't do something, then the
Excellent.
solutions don't present. Like, I don't know.
Could I throw out a really interesting link of this guy Wesley Clark?
Wesley Bryan.
I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld.
Yeah, but they've
Shut up.
I've seen this. They f***ed up with Iraq.
Yeah,
and
the people haven't seen it.
I know, but the plan didn't work,
Used to work for me.
so they didn't do it.
Called me and he said, "Sir, you gotta.
So it doesn't
You gotta
matter.
come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says,
Also, we could be
"We
lying.
made
There's
the
also
decision.
that.
We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September.
Have you seen this?
I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they
General
don't know what
Lindsay.
else to do."
I don't know why we're going to war, but you got to tell me.
I said, "Well, did they find some information collected?"
So anyways, for that, I'll link have this link in the description below, guys, for anyone else who is curious. But basically, it's this General Wesley Clark basically saying when he was in the military about how he found a memo how there was going to be a plan to take out 7 countries in 5 years, and so that was Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan, and
Was
he's-
Yemen in
Yeah.
there too?
Yemen.
So just to play devil's advocate, not that I don't agree that this was probably what they were thinking, but
That
just to-
doesn't scare you or blow your mind or make you think?
I just want to play devil's advocate. I don't agree with what I'm going to say, but I just want to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
The idea that he's claiming that he found a war plan that said this. War plans are these things that countries make up all the time with scenarios that are realistic and unrealistic. You can look at U.S. war plans for war with the Soviets. That doesn't mean that they were planning to start a war with the Soviets. That just means that they had these war plans. So just because the United States, someone in the chain of command asked some other guy, listen, what happens if we have to invade these 7 countries? What happens when we invade Afghanistan and all these other 7 countries join a coalition war against us? That could have been the response to that question. The idea that, well, we have to invade these 7 countries because now they're at war with us. Or what if we wipe through Afghanistan in a week? Well, why don't we go wipe through every other country? It's the idea that we could do this, but that doesn't mean that we are planning to do it, is the devil's advocate side of that statement. That just because there's a plan to do it doesn't mean that they were intending to do it. Because, like, we had plans to invade the Soviet Union after the Second World War. That doesn't mean that we did it.
Well, Korea started right after.
Well, that too. But I'm just like just because there's a plan doesn't mean that that was the plan.
Yeah, it could have just been a contingency for if our 2 wars went well, which they didn't go according to plan at all. Like you said, a lot longer than 3 weeks.
Yeah. If you because I could Google how to make a nuclear warhead and have all the steps. I don't have the hardware to do it. If you because I could Google how to make a nuclear warhead and have all the steps. I don't have the hardware to do it.
Oh, that's going in the trailer. They
developed the hardware to do it, and they had help from the Chinese in developing that hardware.
Yeah, if you think about it, it's like
because really the hardware is the hard part. How do you make something that can refine uranium? How do you make a bomb? You know, but refining uranium,
you have to have allies that will support you having a nuclear weapon. So it's communism.
Right.
If you have a yes.
Yeah, but then once you get a nuclear weapon, you don't have to listen to anybody.
If you want to lose your allies, yes, you do.
Well, so this is the interesting question. This is the idea that Iran wants to do.
Because you can't just go you versus the world. That's never.
You can with nukes. That's what Russia. That's what the Soviet Union.
Who would want to do that?
The Soviet Union. The Soviet Union did that for 50, 60 years.
But did they act on it? They did the.
They ran half the world for half a century.
We had the Cuban Missile Crisis, obviously.
I mean, how long has America been running the world?
But the USSR had its own entire sphere. They owned half of Europe. And because if they didn't have nukes, we probably would have started a war with them to get, well, maybe not. But the idea was that because they had nuclear weapons, they can do whatever they want, and there's not much we can do about it outside of diplomatic shenanigans.
Well, isn't the whole thing when it comes down to nuclear war, it's like it becomes a game of numbers. It's like we took 50 million.
It's mad. It's mutual. That's why the nuclear arms race was like it's mutually assured destruction. That's why there was the United States and Russia. Russia, I think, had the more. They had like 18,000 nuclear warheads. The idea was, listen, United States, we can do basically whatever we want because if we don't like it, we're just going to end life on Earth. 17,000 nuclear warheads will kill Americans 5 times over. You could drop a nuke on every U.S. city like 4 times.
I was just reading. I was reading this book on Area 51, and I was learning about the Hood bomb.
What a switch up.
So that was the. Well, no, I was literally I'm reading 2 books at once. Why is that so funny? We don't even have time to go to frickin' AI. I wanted to talk about the FBI, but
we can talk about AI.
AI, this is my podcast.
You asked about Korea. Somebody asked about Korea. Why is it differently? Because Vietnam was started on kind of shady. Like the reason why Vietnam was shady was one because the U.S. was really the only one involved. The French got their ass kicked and left, and then we got involved because of the domino theory, supposedly. But Korea
What's the domino theory for the people listening?
Jeez, the domino theory.
Dude, don't be pretentious. People don't know.
The idea that that communism would topple one country after another, and specifically Southeast Asia.
It's the idea that communist countries wouldn't have dominoes. So
yeah,
so liberals making the most sense here, guys.
If communism takes over Vietnam, then communism takes over Laos, then communism takes over Thailand, then communism takes over Bangladesh and Malaysia. And it's that the whole 20th century was contained communism in the second half.
But think about how much like communism mongering like led to.
I don't know how
where America is now.
It's kind of, well. Do you disagree that communist regimes were some of the most dictatorial and worst regimes in the world history?
I think they were the worst.
So do you think that containing them and preventing the spread of this terrible communism that ruins people and kills millions of people is a good idea?
Case by case.
This is but this is the
the
justification.
way the premise is phrased, right?
But
of
that's the
question?
justification for the Vietnam War, was that communism is so bad that we have to do anything to stop it.
But should we use Code Orange?
Yeah,
and just be like,
But that's
there's an irony to being against communism and killing democratically elected
but
leaders.
see, exactly, this is the problem with war, is that you look at it on a piece of paper and say that a Vietnam War, this will go just like Korea, will come out at least even as the good guys, will stop communism, will have this greater good for the earth. But then you get into a war, and it turns into a guerrilla war, and it's like, well, how do we still need to defeat our enemy? And then the question becomes, well, how do we defeat our enemy? And then it becomes a morally questionable thing because you start killing civilians. You talk about Agent Orange and the way it wrecked the countryside of Vietnam, but we don't criticize strategic bombing in the Second World War, the same thing that we do about that, even though strategic bombing killed innumerously more civilians. The only one that we really we consider a bad thing is the bombing of Dresden, but even then you can write that off morally. But like, how many times did we bomb the entire city of Berlin? Yeah, we tried to keep it to more industrial areas, but some of the but they were specific.
Shout out to bombing the Houthis, Dan.
But that wasn't the entire point of strategic bombing. There were specific missions that instead of bombing the factories, you bomb the place that the people who work in the factories live. And that way you kill the workers instead of the factory, because you can always rebuild the factories, but you can't rebuild the workers as fast.
Right.
So But then that question backs up into, well, this war is morally justified. We have to win the war. How do we win the war? Well, we have to kill civilians. Well, they don't want to.
Agent Orange.
But that
one of the things
Isn't
I think
that
one
kind
of the
a
reasons,
crazy.
one of
that's
the
why
reasons
war
Agent Orange
killing
has slipped
civilians.
down
that's why
so-
you have to avoid
yeah.
war.
Our own veterans were affected by Agent Orange. The people who were spreading it all got
I didn't
horrible
know that.
diseases.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know a lot
have
about
a
the
different
Gulf War.
I have a different belief than these guys.
Please.
I think America's done some real shady things in some wars, and specifically, like if you look into the Philippine-American War, like do a bit of research on that. We drove them into a famine. Like,
Yeah.
But what was what?
I know that's not
What
very
time was
very
that?
relevant. That was early. That was 1900. Like so.
But the question about that, but it isn't a question about was that wrong, because that was wrong.
Yeah.
But the question is, but see the only issue I have with that is that kind of thing. Like in that specific scenario, yes, the condemnable party is the United States. But the reason they did that is because that's just the way you conducted a war back then. The entire human race was flawed in that way. And so to criticize the United
Right.
States solely is fair,
Yeah.
but also unfair in the idea that the British Empire did the same thing 30 times over in more places than we did.
Right.
And so to say that the United States is a worse country than these other countries because of that, and use that as justification to a thing today, isn't necessarily
Well,
fair.
question
Even though
is-
those
well,
things
like,
were
do
terrible.
Do you think the United States of America is uniquely evil as like an imperial power?
I think we're uniquely not as evil as everybody else. I think that's what makes the United States kind of interesting in the
True.
short history that we have. That a lot of opportunities we had for imperial domination, because the Spanish-American War was really the only time the United States was imperial.
Isn't there something that we have to admit, though, is that America, I don't want to sound like a liberal when I say this, but like America has some type of savior complex where, once again, we've talked about this a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that's unique to the United States. I think probably if you looked at the history of like the British
'Cause we could-
Empire,
yeah.
in their own mental justification, they think they're bringing culture and order to
It's strong governments. Like that's a central theme.
Yeah.
Like, right.
Because we can go and criticize like Russia and the Islamic states in the Middle East all day, but then they're just trying to spread their ideology, and so is America.
Right.
Or
But it's
I should say
interesting
the
'cause-
West, not
Right.
America. But
Sorry to cut you off.
that's okay. What are we gonna?
No, keep going. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just gonna say it's interesting because the Middle East thing, they're like we're spreading Islam in this culture. America's not necessarily a religion. It's more so like
Yeah, it's an ideology.
ideology. We have this power, and we think our culture is the best. Like, right? That's how people behave.
It's like this war in Iran. It's like, well, you can't just sit back and do nothing. If you do, then you can be, you can wash your hands of it. But then if Israel gets nuked as a consequence of it, then you're complicit in that happening because you could have stopped it.
Isn't that why everyone hates libertarians? Because it's like an easy position to take and with no responsibility.
That's my problem with them. I agree.
You can always criticize.
I agree with libertarians on a lot of stances, but like there's things like, I mean, for instance, like hard drugs like heroin and fentanyl. Like you can't make decisions when you're on those drugs.
I
so
just don't understand.
You shouldn't be allowed to take those drugs because they alter your ability to make decisions that the libertarians believe you should be able to make.
Dude, $300 billion to Israel or to Ukraine. And then, like, our veterans can't get health care. It's like, or can't get
homeless problem.
I mean, we're
and
way
our
off
mental health
base there.
crisis. God, sorry, that's a little too personal for me. Jeez.
Well, that's that goes back to like if you could snap your fingers and fix every problem, it'd be a lot easier. But
I don't know. I'm not gonna lie, guys.
That's why the lobbies are interesting because it's like there's going to be independent lobbies for both of those people. One for Israel and one for the people who are homeless veterans, and the ones for Israel. I think my mic cut out.
I can't hear anything.
Okay.
They don't want to hear me. I'm being shut down.
They cut
there we
Joe's
go.
mic.
All right, now
You're
I'm speaking the
saying
truth.
stuff that's too
I'm speaking the truth, and they don't want to hear that the lobbyists are for fault in it. But that's the idea that the lobbyists for Ukraine won out because that was the big story. There was big public support for it, and there's not as much public support for homeless veterans and shit. The money's got to go somewhere, and that's just how it is. And you can talk about the reasons why that is, but that's a whole nother conversation.
I just don't think if you're dying halfway across the world, you can't get like a job for like 60, 70 grand with benefits that like really take care of you.
I agree, and there's plenty of policy decisions that could be changed to that. But then the people for Ukraine would argue do both. There's other places you can cut the funding.
Yeah, and I don't want to end the podcast on a bad note or a gloomy note at all. But I just think to be honest, guys, when I see all this stuff going on, I know it's very convenient to be like, oh, the world's ending or the world's changing and all this stuff is going on, and who knows, we could be laughing about this a year from now, or we could all be dead. You never really know. But it's just because I'm actually seeing like real world events and timelines unfold before our eyes. But it's just kind of concerning because it's like there's not really much I can do. Like I can try to vote and like put the people that I believe in the right places and whatever. I can't get this like weird sinking feeling out the back of my the back or just the bottom of my chest where it's like I don't like how I just don't have a good feeling about what's going on. And I know that everything is super politicized and half the time, but like, dude, it's even crazy. I've been just nothing but Iran the last 3 weeks, and I can't stop. I've watched like 3 or 4 Netanyahu documentaries. I forgot to mention this earlier, but are you guys aware of these guys under Netanyahu, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir? They're like his financier, and the other one is like the head of the national security. And these guys are like wild boys, man. They're like, oh, there's this one terrorist in this building, like just level the building if there's like 100, 200 people in it.
I don't know. You should send me one of those Netanyahu documentaries. I'm just kind of curious because he's been in power for so long.
Yeah, this one I'm watching right now is actually I did watch this one. I know I trashed Candace Owens earlier, but this guy Ian Carroll was on her podcast because she was like on maternity leave or whatever, and so there's this documentary, like it was on Prime, it was on YouTube, it got taken down. Basically it covers a lot of like Netanyahu's corruption because like there was 3 different points where he was prime minister, right? The 90s and then mid 2000s and then up until now, but just like things of like getting bribes, gifts, all that jazz and whatever. He had like a pretty bad affair at the time, which in their culture is with in America's culture, if you have an affair, it's like, oh, who cares? It's freaking water under the bridge. It's just concerning to me. I know everyone here is more mentally stable than I am, but it's just very. I'm trying to think of what the word I'm looking for. It's like obviously concerning, but I mean it's also super interesting as well. And one thing I want to, if anyone made it to the end of this podcast as we're wrapping up in the next couple of minutes, it's like, I don't want to act like I know anything or an expert. Like, obviously, clearly not, by the way, that I freaking couldn't even put my ideas together the first 5 minutes. But it's just something that's on the front of my mind, and I don't want to go up to every random person in the street like, give me your thoughts on Israel, because that's like, You know, we didn't even talk that much about like being if you're criticizing Israel, you're anti-Semitic. Like, but
yeah, I mean, just to go off your point where you're like, yeah, this is scary, and I don't know what's going on.
Joe doesn't seem worried,
but that's a byproduct of being one of the most powerful
a lot of fear-mongering,
countries in the world. There's a lot of there's a lot of fear-mongering because we're a very powerful country. If we were like Switzerland or one of those European countries, we wouldn't have a lot to worry about. But
that's the mantle that the United States has assumed of itself. And like you were talking about earlier, well, yeah, we act like this because we kind of given ourselves that mantle, and
the rest of the world's kind of
history
assumed it as well.
As for right now, I'm not talking about the future.
Isn't
but as
China
for, as
like
for
playing
right
the
now,
long game though? Like they're just
China and Russia.
I heard China through the PSL is funding some of the protests in LA. Did you hear about that?
Yeah. When we do our AI episode, we can talk about China because they are, they're catching up to us. They might even be ahead of us at this point.
This is Trump about 20 minutes ago talking about these strikes.
All right.
4 minutes long.
We'll hit this and then we'll wrap up.
So this is what he has to say. Yeah. I'm curious.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success.
I want that bumper for forever.
Yeah.
He's not even getting to the interesting part. Just let it buffer.
Give it a second and then.
Key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years,
I told you it'd be funny.
Death to
I
America,
told you.
Death to Israel.
There's an underlying
They have been
comedy
killing
to
our
everything he
people,
does.
blow.